I never thought I'd see her again, not in a million years, and yet there she was, barreling down my street in that obnoxiously pink convertible like she owned the place. I was standing on my porch, coffee in hand, trying to act casual like it was just another quiet morning, but inside my brain was screaming, oh no, not again. Karen, the original HOA nightmare. The queen of passive-aggressive notes, parking fines, and friendly visits that always ended in threats. She had served her time, or at least that's what I thought, but apparently prison hadn't dulled her ego one bit. She waved at the neighbors like royalty inspecting her court, all perfectly coiffed hair and matching outfit, sunglasses on, the kind that screams, I'm fabulous and don't you forget it. I sipped my coffee slowly, pretending to admire the view, but my eyes were locked on her. She parked at the first house on the block, the one I'd secretly purchased months ago after her reign ended. She didn't know a thing, not a single clue. She stepped out, surveying the neighborhood, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her mind. She was plotting. Oh yes, she was plotting. The neighbors were peeking from windows, whispering, the usual mix of curiosity and fear. Karen thrived on that. She loved the attention, the power, and now she had no idea that the tables had turned. I could almost hear her thoughts, I'm back, I'm taking control, everyone will do what I say. I leaned against the railing, trying to keep my expression neutral. But the truth was, I was giddy. Part of me wanted to run out there and shout, surprise, Karen, I own everything now. But no, patience was key. Let her make the first move. Let her believe she was still the queen, that way her fall would be spectacular. She started packing in front of the house, clipboard in hand, muttering under her breath. I could see the familiar flinch of her old neighbor, the one she used to terrorize over mailbox alignment, peeking through the curtains, holding her phone ready to call me if things got too wild. Classic Karen behavior. Always intimidating, always dramatic, always thinking everyone was beneath her. And then it happened. She spotted me on the porch. That smirk, half sneer, half I own you glare spread across her face. She waved like we were old friends, but I could see the challenge in her eyes. She was sizing me up, trying to figure out if I was the same scared neighbor she used to bully. Good morning, she called out, her voice way too cheerful. I see you're still here. Oh, how I've missed our little neighborhood chats. I raised my coffee cup casually. Morning, Karen, welcome back. My tone was light, almost dismissive, but underneath my mind was calculating every possible angle. She stepped closer, clipboard raised, pointing at the lawn. You know, I might have to issue a citation for. I cut her off, smiling, really, for what? Her face froze for a split second. I could tell she wasn't expecting that. The confidence wavered, only slightly but enough. That little crack in her armor was delicious. I let her fume a moment before continuing. Oh, and by the way, it's interesting seeing this house again. Feels different somehow. Karen blinked, confused. Different? What do you mean? I sipped my coffee, savoring her hesitation. Well, it's funny, a lot has changed since you were gone, a lot. Her eyes narrowed. Changed how? I didn't answer, not yet. Let her stew, let her paranoia build, that was the fun part. She huffed, flipping through her clipboard as if it held some secret power. Well, I'll be back, she said, voice dripping with menace. And next time, things will be different, you'll see. I watched her walk back to her pink convertible, the neighbors still peeking from behind curtains, some trying not to laugh, others nervously holding their phones. I smiled to myself. Oh, Karen, you really have no idea what's coming. And with that, she drove off slowly, surveying the block, plotting her next move. But one thing was certain, she had no idea who she was dealing with now. The quiet neighbor, the one she thought she could scare, that was me, and I was ready. The street went silent again, the only sound the distant hum of her convertible fatting down the road. I set my coffee down, already thinking ahead, already planning. Let her come back, let her try. The neighborhood had changed, and this time the queen would fall. I should have known she wouldn't just drive away and disappear. Karen never does. By mid-morning, she was back, this time marching down the sidewalk like she owned the place, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against the pavement like a war drum. I watched from my kitchen window, pretending to water the plants, trying not to smile. Inside, I was buzzing with anticipation. She stopped in front of my house, tilted her head and narrowed her eyes. The classic Karen glare, it's the one that makes you wonder if you should apologize for existing. She flipped open that clipboard like it contained the secrets of the universe and started rattling off fines, violations, and rules nobody had followed since she went away. I leaned casually against the counter, nodding politely, hiding the fact that I was barely containing my laughter. Your mailbox is crooked, she declared, and the hedge, oh, it's far too high, far too high. I raised my eyebrows. Really, I asked, that seems minor. Her face twisted like I'd personally insulted her mother. Minor, minor, the neighborhood standards are very clear. I enforce the rules because I care. I sipped my coffee, keeping my expression blank. Inside, I was screaming, "Care, you, the woman who fines neighbors for leaving their garage doors open." She took a step closer, pointing at the walkway. "And your lawn, it's uneven, did you even bother to measure it?" I straightened, leaned on the counter, and replied casually, "Funny, I always thought a little personality in landscaping was charming." Karen blinked. That pause, it was gold. I could see her calculating how to regain control. That was her favorite pastime, strategizing like she was some HOA general preparing for battle, and for once her calculations were about to blow up in her face. A few neighbors were peeking from behind curtains. Some whispered, "Oh no, she's back." Others chuckled quietly. Karen thrived on attention, but this time the audience wasn't entirely on her side. I decided to push the suspense a bit. "By the way," I said slowly, "it's interesting how a few things have changed since you've been gone." She cocked her head. "Changed how?" she demanded, eyebrows knitting. I smiled faintly, savoring the tiny flicker of doubt in her eyes. "Well, let's just say the neighborhood looks a little different. Some new faces, new rules, you'd be surprised who's in charge now." Her lips twitched. That's when she stepped up her game. She straightened her back, adjusted her clipboard, and declared in a voice meant to command obedience, "I'm here to make sure every property is up to code, every lawn, every driveway, every fence, and I'll enforce the fines if necessary." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Fines?" I asked lightly. "Interesting, you do realize the neighborhood has changed ownership since you left, right?" She froze, a flicker of confusion crossed her face, but she quickly recovered, narrowing her eyes. "Ownership doesn't matter, HOA rules are the law here." I chuckled softly. "The law, huh? Well, funny story." I didn't finish the thought, letting her imagine the worst. Her expression shifted from confidence to suspicion, a little crack forming in her armor. That crack, it's the thing I had been waiting for. Karen huffed, tapping her clipboard with her perfectly manicured nails. You'll see, I'm not going anywhere, this neighborhood needs me." I smiled inwardly. "Oh, I have no doubt you'll stick around," I said, deliberately vague. "It's just who you think you're sticking around with has changed." Her nostrils flared. She glanced around nervously, as if realizing that some of the neighbors were watching her, probably wondering if she still had authority. Little did she know, the authority she thought she had was now mine, quietly, legally, and utterly unchallengeable. Karen clenched her clipboard, took a step back, and muttered something about getting a lawyer. She stormed off, flipping her hair in slow motion, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. I stayed on my porch, coffee in hand, watching her pink convertible fade down the street, imagining the panic that would hit her once she realized just how much control she had lost. The neighbors peeked out of their windows again, some smirking, some shaking their heads. And me, I couldn't help but grin. Karen thought she was storming into a battlefield she could command. Little did she know the battlefield had changed. And I was already 10 steps ahead. I watched her pink convertible disappear around the corner, muttering angrily to herself, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, pure, unadulterated anticipation. Karen was back, the ultimate HOA nightmare, and she had absolutely no idea who she was dealing with now. I leaned back on my porch swing, sipping coffee, letting her anger simmer in my mind. She thought she had power over the neighborhood, but she didn't even realize most of the homes on this block were technically mine. Every property she had ever bossed around, every lawn she'd criticized, every head she'd scolded, it was all under my control. And the best part, she had no clue. The thought made me grin. Karen had spent years building herself a reputation as the untouchable HOA queen. Letters, fines, threats, casual intimidation, it was all part of her empire. And now, that empire was gone, but I wasn't going to just announce it. No, that would be too easy. I wanted her to discover it slowly, painfully, and publicly. I walked down the street, pretending to check the mail, acting as if nothing had changed. From a distance, I could see her packing in front of one of the houses I now owned. She had her clipboard out again, scribbling furiously, muttering about violations and community standards. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, some laughing quietly. She was putting on a show, and everyone else knew she was no longer in charge. I paused near her, making sure she noticed me. "Morning, Karen," I said lightly, tilting my head as if greeting an old acquaintance. Her eyes darted to me, narrowing. You're still here," she said, voice sharp. "I thought you moved away." "Not yet," I replied, letting the words hang. "I've been watching. It's fascinating, all the changes since you left." Her brow furrowed. "Changes?" she demanded. "What are you talking about?" I smiled faintly. "Oh, little things, some new neighbors, some new rules, maybe even a few new owners. You'd be surprised." Her face twisted, like she had just been handed a puzzle she couldn't solve. She flailed slightly, gesturing at the house. I don't understand, this neighborhood, it should all be following my rules, I'm in charge here. I leaned casually on the mailbox, letting my tone drip with subtle amusement. In charge, I repeated. That's interesting, I guess we have different definitions of that word. She blinked, confusion, frustration, panic, I could see it building like steam ready to explode. Karen thrived on being the puppet master, but here she had no strings to pull. Every gesture, every threat, every dramatic word she used was meaningless. And the neighbors, they could see it. I noticed a few of them silently smirking from behind curtains, whispering, she's lost it. That gave me a quiet, satisfying thrill. Karen had always been terrifying when she had the crowd on her side. Now that same crowd was quietly watching her unravel. She waved her clipboard, trying to gather composure. I will not be ignored, I have the rights. You do have rights, I said smoothly, interrupting. Just not here, not anymore. I let that sink in, watching as confusion spread across her face. Every step she took, every word she shouted, I let it wash over me like water off a duck back, because in reality the ground had shifted beneath her feet, and she hadn't noticed. Karen's hands shook slightly as she gestured at the hedge. This is unacceptable. Someone has to enforce the rules. I nodded slowly, smiling faintly. You'd be surprised how flexible the rules can be, especially when the rules don't belong to you anymore. Her jaw tightened. That's when it hit me, she had no idea she was standing on property I owned. That every home she had tried to control, every lawn she had critiqued, was technically mine. The power she wielded so arrogantly before was now entirely under my control. And the best part, she would find out slowly. She would fume, strategize, and fail, and every neighbor watching would see the unmasking happen in real time. Karen glared at me, muttered something about lawyers, and stormed off to the next house, clipboard raised like a shield. I just watched, smiling, savoring the slow burn. The secret advantage wasn't just that I owned the neighborhood. It was the way I could watch her unravel, thinking she was still in charge, while the truth quietly dominated every corner of the street. As she disappeared down the block, muttering and flailing, I sipped my coffee and whispered under my breath, "Welcome back, Karen, you have no idea what's coming." By the next morning, it was clear Karen had no intention of letting the neighborhood breathe. I spotted her packing the block like a general preparing for battle, clipboard clutched tightly in her manicured hands. She had already knocked on a few doors, barking orders and issuing imaginary fines, as if her parole papers had somehow reinstated her HOA authority. I watched from the porch, pretending to water my plants while secretly recording her every move. Every dramatic hand gesture, every exasperated sigh, every pointed finger, it was a performance worthy of an Emmy. And the best part, none of it had any power. She didn't know I owned the majority of the homes she was trying to inspect. She didn't know the tables had turned so completely. Karen started at the neighbor's lawn 2 doors down. "This hedge is far too high," she shouted, waving the clipboard like a sword. "I will issue a citation if this isn't corrected immediately." The neighbor peeked nervously from behind the curtain, unsure whether to call the police or laugh. I stifled a chuckle, taking a sip of coffee. Her fury was delicious, and her powerlessness made it even sweeter. She turned her attention to the driveway. "And the driveway is cracked, uneven, and completely unacceptable," she screamed, as if the asphalt itself had personally offended her. She jotted down notes furiously, muttering to herself about fines, penalties, and the integrity of the community. I almost felt sorry for the poor street, almost. Deciding to escalate, she stormed toward the next house, clipboard flailing, shouting about illegal modifications and unsanctioned landscaping. She had no idea that house, too, was under my ownership. Every dramatic proclamation, every threat was completely meaningless. And the fact that she thought she was still in control, it was almost artistic. Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, some whispering, "What is she even doing?" Others quietly laughed. She didn't notice their amusement, too focused on her self-appointed mission to restore order. I could almost see the thought forming in her head, "I will reclaim this neighborhood. I will reassert my authority. No one will defy me." I decided to intervene subtly, appearing just at the edge of her vision. "Good morning, Karen," I said lightly, feigning casual friendliness. Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. You again, I thought. I raised a hand, letting her sputter. "I see you're busy," I said, "making sure everyone's lawns are in perfect order, I assume." She puffed up her chest, trying to regain authority. "Of course, I am making sure this neighborhood adheres to the rules." I smiled faintly, savoring her growing confusion. "Rules? Funny, I always thought the neighborhood had changed a bit since you've been gone. Some new faces, new arrangements." Her brow furrowed. "Arrangements, what do you mean?" I tilted my head innocently. Oh, you know little things, you'd be surprised who's in charge now. Her face froze for a second as if my words didn't compute. Then she snapped back, pointing furiously at the next house. I'm not finished here, someone must obey the rules, someone. I let her rant, pretending to check my watch. Every threat, every dramatic gesture, every attempt to assert dominance useless. None of it mattered. The quiet reality was that she no longer held any sway. The laws she had cherished for years didn't apply to me or any of the homes I controlled. Karen stomped down the street, muttering under her breath, scrawling more violations on her clipboard. Every step she took was another reminder of the irony. She was furious, authoritative in theory, but powerless in practice. She was a storm with no wind, a ship with no rudder. I took a slow sip of coffee, smiling quietly. The suspense of watching her unravel, thinking she could still control the neighborhood, was intoxicating. I imagined the look on her face when she finally realized she wasn't just facing a few neighbors. She was facing someone who literally owned the streets she had terrorized for years. By mid-afternoon, she had moved to the last block, huffing, flailing, muttering about lawyers, fines, and restitution. She had no idea that every property she scolded, every lawn she critiqued, every head she measured was legally mine. Every threat she threw in my direction, every intimidating glare she cast, bounced harmlessly off me. The neighbors were watching, some from windows, some from driveways, all silently cheering. I could hear faint whispers. She's lost it. She has no power. Is that really Karen? And through it all, I stayed calm, patient, observing every move, every mistake. Karen might think she was striking, but in reality, she was digging her own pit. The storm she carried was about to collapse, and I was standing safely outside of it, coffee in hand, savoring the quiet before the ultimate reveal. As her pink convertible disappeared around the corner again, muttering and scribbling, I couldn't help but whisper to myself, "This is going to be fun." Oh, Karen, you have no idea. Just when I thought Karen might take a breath, the mail arrived. Not just any mail, the infamous Karen certified letter. I knew the moment I saw the thick envelope with her handwriting sprawled across it that chaos was coming. She had never done anything small, and this was no exception. My neighbors peeked from their windows as I carefully opened it, already sensing the performance about to unfold. The first thing I noticed, the smell, that unmistakable scent of overzealous self-importance mixed with fear and anger. I unfolded the letter slowly, letting my eyes dance across the words. Fines, citations, threats, legal action, penalties for every imagined violation in the neighborhood, and somehow, somewhere, a scolding about my reckless use of decorative lawn ornaments. I paused, took a deep breath, and let out a quiet chuckle. This is exactly what I've been waiting for. Karen had clearly spent hours writing this masterpiece, imagining I would panic, beg for forgiveness, or maybe even attempt a hasty correction to avoid her wrath. Little did she know I didn't just own most of the neighborhood, I also owned the power to ignore her letter entirely without consequence. She was threatening me with authority that no longer existed. I reread a paragraph about immediate fines and community standards, shaking my head. Immediate fines, she wrote. I imagined her standing there in full armor, wielding her clipboard like a sword. It was almost heroic in a ridiculous sort of way. I leaned back in my chair, coffee in hand, picturing the dramatic flair she would employ when she stormed my door next. And of course, I knew she would come. Karen never handled rejection gracefully. Threaten a few neighbors, sure, but when she realized one person, me, was untouchable, that's when her world would crumble piece by piece in full public view. I decided to craft a response. Not angry, not petty, but meticulous, calm, and legally untouchable. Every word had to sting just enough, but without giving her any ammunition. I began drafting, a polite acknowledgement of her letter, a reminder that ownership had changed hands, and a gentle suggestion that she familiarize herself with the current neighborhood structure before issuing more threats. I imagined delivering it to her in person. Her face, the confusion slowly growing into disbelief, that tiny flicker of uncertainty that comes when someone finally realizes they are no longer in control. Oh, it would be priceless. While writing, I could already picture the scene. Karen storming down the street, clipboard raised, trying to rally the neighbors, only to find out that I legally owned the properties she was attempting to fine. Every dramatic hand gesture she threw, every word of fury would fall on deaf ears. She had been living in a world where her threats carried weight, but that world no longer existed. By the time I finished drafting my response, I felt a sense of giddy satisfaction. I would hand-deliver it, of course. Karen loved drama. Why deprive her of the ultimate theatrical moment? She would see in black and white the reality she had ignored for far too long. The quiet neighbor she once terrorized now controlled the entire stage. And I knew she would come, she couldn't resist. Karen thrives on conflict, she lives for confrontation, and when she showed up expecting fear she would find calm, polite, calm, and entirely untouchable. I could almost hear her muttering under her breath as she stormed through the block, imagining the chaos she could create, only to be met with nothing. The suspense was delicious. I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited. Every creak of the porch, every car passing by, every distant footstep added tension. Karen was out there somewhere, planning her next move, completely unaware that the very homes she intended to police were under my legal ownership. Every attempt to assert her dominance was futile. As I folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, I felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about owning property, it was about watching someone unravel in real time. Karen's plans, her confidence, her carefully constructed aura of power, all of it was about to collapse, and I would be there, quietly sipping coffee, witnessing every spectacular moment. I smiled to myself. Karen's certified letter was the opening salvo in a war she couldn't win, in a neighborhood she no longer controlled, and she had no idea what was coming next. I could see her from across the street before she even reached my door. Karen, pink clipboard in hand, marching toward me with the kind of determination only someone who thinks they're untouchable can muster. I stood calmly on my porch, coffee in hand, acting as if I'd just woken up and the world was perfectly normal. Inside, though, pure anticipation. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. The hand-delivered response to her certified letter. Every carefully chosen word, every subtle legal point, every polite but crushing reminder that the neighborhood was now mine, all ready to land like a bomb. She approached, stomping slightly, muttering under her breath. This isn't over, they'll see, everyone will see," her voice cracked just slightly. I could feel the suspense building and I didn't even have to say a word. I opened the gate slowly, letting her see me, letting her stew in the moment. "Morning, Karen," I said lightly, tilting my head in mock casualness. Her eyes snapped to me, narrowing. You received my letter?" she demanded, trying to sound confident but failing. I held up the envelope, my smile calm and controlled. "I did, and I've taken the time to respond." She leaned forward, practically quivering with anticipation like a storm waiting to explode. "Well," she pressed, as if my words would crumble the universe she thought she controlled. I handed her the envelope slowly. Every second felt like an eternity. She grabbed it with one hand, clutching her clipboard in the other, as though the two objects were equally important in asserting her authority. She tore it open, unfolded the letter, and started reading. At first, her eyes skimmed quickly, scanning the surface, and then I saw it, the tiny flicker of confusion followed by disbelief. Her brow furrowed, her lips parted slightly, and she muttered, how, this can't be right." I let her stew for a moment, watching carefully. The suspense wasn't just for the audience anymore, it was for her, the queen of confrontation, finally realizing she might be powerless. My letter calmly explained in precise legal terms that I now own the majority of the neighborhood, including the very homes she had tried to fine and police for years. I had written it carefully, polite, professional, and completely untouchable. Every property she had ever critiqued, every head she had scolded, every mailbox she had aligned to perfection was now legally mine. Her hands shook slightly as she continued to read, scanning the paragraphs over and over like a code she couldn't crack. I could hear the muttering under her breath. "No, this isn't possible, they can't, this is impossible." I stepped forward casually, sipping my coffee, watching her unravel. "Surprising, isn't it?" I asked softly. "The neighborhood has changed a bit since you've been gone." She looked up at me, eyes wide, hands clutching the paper as though it might physically shield her from the truth. I don't understand," she stammered. "I was in charge, I enforced the rules, everyone listened to me." "And now," I said gently, "now it's different, the rules, the fines, the authority, you no longer have any of it here, not one bit." The silence that followed was almost deafening. Her clipboard slipped slightly in her grasp, as if the weight of the truth was too much to bear. Neighbors peeked from windows and lawns, watching the moment unfold. Some smirked, others whispered to each other. Karen had always relied on the fear she inspired, now she was standing in front of an audience that quietly knew she was powerless. Her face went pale. She blinked rapidly, trying to process the information. Her hands trembled, and for the first time, the confidence she had carried so dramatically for years crumbled into something fragile, uncertain, almost human. Finally, she muttered, but I. I shook my head with a small, amused smile. "No buts, the neighborhood has changed, Karen. The rules you loved enforcing, they no longer apply to the people or homes they once did." She sank into a nearby chair, exasperated, muttering to herself, flipping the letter over and over, searching desperately for some loophole, some escape. There wasn't one. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated the quiet neighbor, the one who had watched, waited, and quietly claimed the entire neighborhood while she was busy being the self-proclaimed queen. I took a final sip of coffee and said softly, "Welcome back, Karen. I hope you enjoy your new role." She looked up, eyes wild, realizing in that moment that she had lost everything she thought she controlled. And just like that, the showdown was over. Not with shouting, not with drama, just with a simple, undeniable truth. I owned the neighborhood, and she had nothing. I thought the showdown on my porch would be the climax, but Karen had other plans. The next morning, she emerged like a general plotting a counterattack, clipboard in hand, determination etched across her face. The problem was, this time she had no army, just a few neighbors who peeked nervously from behind curtains. Her strategy was simple: rally the neighborhood, reclaim authority, and re-establish her HOA empire. She knocked door to door, waving papers, scolding homeowners, and promising fines for minor infractions. She tried to recruit allies, whispering about the good old days when everyone obeyed her every whim. "Listen," she said to one neighbor, a timid man in his 70s, "if we don't stick together, this neighborhood will descend into chaos. I can enforce the rules, but I need your help." The man blinked at her, holding a cup of coffee, clearly trying to decide whether he should nod politely or call the authorities. He nodded politely, muttered something about breakfast, and closed the door. Karen didn't notice the lack of enthusiasm, too caught up in her fantasy of leadership. She moved to the next house, waving papers like a banner of war. "Everyone must follow the rules, no exceptions, the HOA is back." The young couple who answered the door exchanged a glance, barely hiding their amusement. We're not part of the HOA," the woman said, "and honestly, we don't plan to be." Karen's face fell for a split second before she straightened. "You will be, everyone must comply, the neighborhood needs order." The couple smiled politely, nodded, and shut the door. She stared at it for a moment, clipboard trembling, muttering to herself. That's when I noticed a pattern forming. One by one, the neighbors were refusing her, quietly laughing behind closed doors, or simply ignoring her entirely. I watched from a distance, arms crossed, savoring every moment. Karen's energy was frantic now, desperate. The confidence she carried like armor was cracking, replaced by panic and disbelief. Every failed attempt to recruit allies only highlighted the reality she refused to accept: she was alone. Completely alone. By mid-afternoon, she had stormed down the block, papers flailing, shouting about fines, penalties, and community integrity. But the neighborhood wasn't responding. They didn't flinch, they didn't cower, they didn't even acknowledge her presence. She was shouting into a vacuum. I could see the frustration building. Her fists clenched, her face red, her voice rising higher with each refusal. She had spent years thriving on fear and compliance, and now nothing. The rules she had wielded like weapons were meaningless. The authority she had claimed was imaginary. The empire she thought she ruled was gone. She tried to knock on my neighbor's doors one last time, hoping for a sympathetic ear. But the moment she glanced at my porch, I could see the recognition in her eyes, the realization that I wasn't just another neighbor. I had been quietly in control all along. That revelation hit her like a punch to the gut. Karen sank onto the curb, muttering under her breath, flipping her clipboard over and over as if it might magically restore her lost authority. The neighbors who had peeked earlier now emerged, some smirking, some whispering, all silently cheering for me. Karen had underestimated the quiet neighbor, the one who claimed the streets while she played queen. I stepped closer, leaning casually against the fence. "It seems your recruitment strategy isn't going as planned," I said lightly. Her head snapped up, eyes wild, voice shaking. I can still." "No, Karen," I interrupted calmly. "You can't. You lost the neighborhood, the authority, the power, and the people." I gestured at the neighbors gathered discreetly around. "They aren't going to help you, not today, not ever." Her face went pale, her fists dropping to her sides. She realized in that instant that she was not only powerless but utterly isolated. Every attempt to rally support had failed spectacularly. Every plan she had relied on had crumbled. She was standing in the middle of the street, alone, surrounded by people who quietly watched her unravel. Karen muttered something inaudible and got up, her body tense with frustration. She scanned the neighborhood as if expecting someone to come to her rescue. No one did, not a single person. She was truly alone. I took a slow sip of coffee and whispered to myself, "This is it, Karen, the final act, and you have no lines left to speak." For the first time, she looked small, defeated, and utterly human. The queen of the HOA empire had been dethroned, and I had been waiting for this moment all along. The day of the neighborhood meeting arrived, and I had everything planned. Karen thought she was about to confront me one last time, rallying her imaginary army of supporters. She didn't know that the entire block was quietly on my side. Every homeowner I owned, every property under my control, every neighbor who had once feared her, this was my stage. And the curtain was about to rise. I stood on my porch, coffee in hand, waiting. Karen arrived in her trademark pink outfit, heels clicking with dramatic precision. Clipboard in hand, papers fluttering, she looked ready to declare war. I waved casually, inviting her to come closer. "Morning, Karen," I said lightly, voice calm, almost friendly. "Glad you could make it." Her eyes narrowed. I've come to set things straight. The neighborhood needs order," she barked like she was addressing a courtroom. I gestured to the small gathering of neighbors emerging from their homes. "Order, huh? Funny, it seems the neighborhood has changed a bit since you've been gone. Some new rules, some new leadership." Her gaze swept across the crowd. Confusion flickered, then disbelief. She realized slowly, painfully, that she was standing in front of people who no longer answered to her. The neighbors weren't intimidated. They weren't even mildly impressed. They were quiet, watching, smiling subtly. The queen of the HOA had lost her kingdom. Karen's lips trembled. She opened her clipboard like maybe it would give her authority if she waved it hard enough. I have the right to enforce the rules, the fines, her voice faltered. She couldn't find the words. She had nothing left. I stepped forward calmly, coffee in hand, savoring the moment. "Karen, it's simple. I own the majority of the neighborhood. Every home, every yard, every driveway you thought you had the power to fine or criticize. Mine, completely, legally, no loopholes, no exceptions." Her jaw dropped, her eyes went wide. For the first time, I could see her truly grasping the reality. Every dramatic threat, every scolding note, every imagined power she had gone, evaporated. She stammered. "No buts," I said gently, taking a step closer. "The neighborhood isn't yours anymore, and your reign of intimidation, your empire of fines, it's over." She glanced at the neighbors. Some were smirking, some whispered to each other. Her panic grew with every second. Her clipboard, once a symbol of authority, now looked like a relic of a past life. The reality was undeniable. She was alone, powerless, and completely irrelevant. Karen sank onto the curb, muttering, flailing her hands like a storm trapped in a teacup. She tried to argue, tried to negotiate, tried to find any remaining leverage, but there wasn't any. Every avenue she had relied on for decades had vanished. She was standing in front of me, in front of witnesses, stripped of every illusion of control. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small pink lawn flamingo, a subtle, ironic gesture. "Here," I said softly, handing it to her, "a little reminder of your influence, a token of your past glory." Her eyes flicked to it. She took it hesitantly, staring at it as though it were a tiny monument to everything she had lost. For a moment, I thought she might explode, but instead, she simply sat there, stunned, silent. The neighbors, meanwhile, quietly applauded in their own way. No loud cheers, no dramatic gestures, just the calm satisfaction of watching a tyrant dethroned. The quiet justice was perfect. Karen eventually stood up, her energy spent, her aura of control gone completely. She muttered something about "this isn't over" and stormed off, leaving the pink flamingo behind on the curb, a symbol of her spectacular defeat. I stood on the porch, taking a slow sip of coffee, watching her pink convertible disappear down the street. The neighborhood was quiet again, the sun glinting off the freshly painted fences, trimmed lawns, and orderly driveways, all under my control. Karen had returned thinking she would reclaim her throne. Instead, she had walked into the reality that the quiet neighbor, the one she had underestimated, mocked, and terrorized for years, now owned the kingdom. And for the first time in years, I felt completely, perfectly, undeniably satisfied. The Queen of Chaos had been dethroned. The streets were mine, and everyone watching knew one simple truth: never underestimate the quiet neighbor. As I sat back on my porch, coffee in hand, I whispered to myself, a grin spreading across my face, "Welcome back, Karen, but this kingdom, it's mine now." The streets were quiet, the neighbors smiling, and the lesson was clear. The loudest queen doesn't always win. Sometimes, the quietest one waits, plans, and claims victory in a way no one sees coming. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.